everybody, and welcome to another Employee Spotlight. This one's going to be a little bit of a mix-up because I wanted to make sure that I included Natlee in some of our panel discussions last month we were doing around Black History Month, but she wasn't able to make some of those recordings. So I'm going to mash up a few of my questions here today, not only to get to know Natlee better, but also to make sure we cover off on some of her experiences in cybersecurity as a woman in March, Women's Month, as well as a woman of color, February, Black History Month. So Natlee Green, thank you so much for being here today.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Erin. It's fun
I'm
talking to
really
you.
glad to. And you're sort of the top of our people chain, if we must say. You know, you are our global head of human resources. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and what you're doing at CyberClan.
Sure. So, goodness, I've been in HR for probably about 20 years, but in technology and cybersecurity specifically, probably for the past six. I started in New York City working for major publishing companies, and I've worked for Vibe Magazine, Time Warner, and started out in the HR, everything from payroll to coordinator, assistant manager, and just over the years have worked my way up to this current role. So it's been a fun ride, and 20 years flies by. Flies.
Absolutely. And I mean, in thinking about the 20 years, you and I have discussed this a lot. You know, we've been both in our careers about the same amount of time, and things have changed. So I can only imagine how it must have been starting out in human resources, perhaps back in the 90s, early 2000s
Yeah.
to 2021 in the culture that we're in right now.
Yes.
And especially then making that transition into a field that predominantly had been, you know, perceived as a very cloak and dagger type of field that not a lot of people were in. Tell us a little
Mhm.
bit about that transition into cybersecurity. What drew you into that industry? It might have just been a job posting, but what drew you into that industry? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about the changes in the HR field altogether.
Sure, yeah. So it actually was kind of a fluke. So my background, so my degrees, my master's and bachelor's are both in communications and PR. And so while living in New York, where I'm from, sort of that industry was easy enough to get into. There were a lot of opportunities, but then when I moved down here to the DC area, the opportunities were different. And so I struggled a little bit when I first came here and I was an HR manager at a Lowe's, at a retail store. And so spending my time there was seasonal hiring, which they did. And the challenge was to hire like 100 people over maybe a 2 or 3 month period. And so that experience in and of itself, as I was going to go into back into corporate, I saw a posting for a need for a head of HR for a small startup, a tech startup in my area. And so one of the top bullets was high growth company, needs
Right.
someone recruiting. I'm like, well, I just hired 100 people in a couple months. And so I met with the CEO. He's like, yeah, we're a 15-person operation. We want to be at 100 people by the end of this year. And I started in about March of the year. So that was my first, I guess, exposure into, in the cybersecurity industry in the firm, the small firm that I was with. And just, I loved it. I loved the fast-paced environment. I loved the ever-changing environment. And I loved learning about, this industry. I have, my kids at home on the internet. I saw myself as a pretty, secure person. Although
Right.
most of my passwords back then were my cat's name with my birthday. So maybe I wasn't as secure as I thought, but I just loved going in and learning about all the different technologies, different threat actors and hackers, and the different ways, that we could be under attack. And then I love being part of a company and hiring individuals who helped fight against that. So it was really
That's
exciting.
cool. That's really cool that you also were able to, because we've talked a lot on this employee spotlight. Whenever I've been speaking with individuals of how did they transition into cybersecurity, it's and everyone's had sort of a different position of whether they were in law before and they saw that this could, these skills were transferable. But for you to be able to see, hey, I just went through a high growth, talent acquisition period with one company. Maybe it's a completely different industry, but it is a talent. And you've once again been able to repeat that level of talent here at CyberClan, because we've also gone through that level of growth since you've been with us.
For sure.
But I think that's really unique. How would you help people better understand where they can find transferable skills within their resumes?
Yeah, so for me, I think, everything that we do in any job, and I'll talk about my first job was at KFC when I was like 14.
Right.
And I remember watching one of those kind of cheesy VHS tapes that I'm dating myself, but they put you in this back room for orientation, put on a VCR tape and show you, this is what the expectations are. And I remember customer service, and at 14 I was a sponge. I was just like, wow, you have to treat everyone like they're your first customer, and this whole customer's always right, and what's their experience, maybe they had a bad day, and they'll come in and you can brighten that up. So just from being that 14-year-old, it really like honing in on that skill, that then translated to how the rest of my career developed, and so much so into HR, being a customer service type of role. So what I'd say to others is, no matter what you did, if it was fast food, retail, even whatever volunteer work you participate in, you have to sort of sit back and review and rediscover all of the things that it took to be successful in that role, and then you can implement them anywhere. And of course, sometimes you have to get a certification or education to sort of back that up, but experience is your best teacher. Keep
I think
getting
that's really, yeah, that's really important. Like a skills inventory, skills and talents inventory, natural gift inventory, and, being able to also spot that opportunity. I just think it's really cool that you would have said, wait a second, what I'm connecting with here is, I mean, you had an HR role to begin with, but what you were connecting with is like, oh, I think I can go in and go do that.
that.
So of course, again, not only were you coming up in HR in a totally different cultural environment, but you were also going into a field that has been very male dominated and perhaps has not been terribly culturally diverse. I'm just curious about, the questions that we discussed with Larry, with Yamara, with Bennett, with Katrina, with Dion, what experiences have you had as a Black woman in this particular field or in your career period that you might want to share with others so that others can contextualize that experience a little bit better for themselves?
For sure. I think for me, and it's funny, just before this call, we did our one part of our presentation for recognizing hidden biases. I think for me, it was unique in the beginning of my career, being in New York City and working for some major corporations. Some of the expectations of how I would have to present myself to be taken seriously were simple things like, wear your hair back in a bun, wear stockings, even if it's 90 degrees out, you should wear some nylon, stockings, and a certain way that I have to dress. And I'm like, well, is it a policy? And some of the sadly, I mean, I wouldn't say sadly, but unfortunately, some of the mentors or mentoring that I got was like, no, just to be taken seriously, wear a suit, your skirt shouldn't be higher than knees, like all of this whole entire checklist that you're telling somebody it's like 20, and
Right.
it was a lot. So I think honestly, my experience, I think more so being a woman has
Right.
been more challenging, and maybe because I was in New York and it's diverse in that way. But as far as being a woman, I know I dealt with a lot of you know like what is it they call it, confirmation bias, right?
Right.
So I had these great ideas, and I was sort of always having to be checked and second checked before somebody would go. So was it because I was young? Was it because I was a woman? Was it because I was a Black woman? I can't say in
Right.
every sense that that was it, but that was the feeling that I had, and have
Sure.
had up until very recently. So um, I don't know if that's unique to being a woman or a Black woman, but that throughout my career is something that has really driven me crazy. That I've had these ideas, brought things to the table, had a background as to why we should go a certain direction. It's like, unless a man said it, in my situation, it could have been coincidental,
Right.
but that's when it was listened to, like, oh, I think we should go that way. I'm like, I
Yeah.
just said it, well, so
Right. Well,
yeah.
that's an interesting, it's right. Like this is the first employee spotlight that will truly be coming out in the month of March. And you do straddle that unique line of having had biases potentially thrown at you because of your color, but then also biases potentially thrown at you because you're a female, both which are very identifying factors that most
Sure.
people can't deny, right? So it is a unique way for people to think through what it means to that individual and how often the people, women or people of color, are thinking about that because they know that the way they look
Right.
might have an impact on the person who's looking or talking to them, whereas you
Exactly.
might not think of that. In the new classification, as I'm embarrassed enough to say, the white male, right? We're doing exactly to the white males that we don't want done to everybody else by classifying them and throwing them into a big homogenized group.
exactly,
Yeah, so
exactly.
yeah, so we'll all be mindful of that too, and I constantly am having to remember that homogenizing that experience is also not fair either.
Sure.
So I'm just curious what, you're being the head of HR, which of course now, isn't just payroll and benefits, but it's talent acquisition, it's talent retention, it's company culture, it's across the board, a lot of different things that you oversee, but you do see almost every candidate, if not every candidate that comes into this company.
Sure.
So how would you advise people when they're thinking about whether it's getting into a role in HR, period, or cybersecurity? How would you advise them to think about gaining skills or
Mhm.
network? What are your thoughts?
That's the key, networking. There's so many opportunities. I mean, of course, now during the pandemic, there's a lot of online and virtual opportunities, but going to conferences, going to offsite training when it's available, and networking with other like-minded individuals, or if not like-minded, just that are in the field that you want to be in. Understand what accomplishments that what they had to do to get where they were or are, how to then be able, like we talked about, take those skills that you already have and transfer them into that. I mean, it's just to be honest, like we're in one thing I've said is being in HR, even all these years, having been trained, having several experiences, we're not going to know everything. And I think cybersecurity, that's especially important to say, like, just be honest about what you don't, what you know, you don't know what you don't know, and let whoever you're talking to as the recruiter, the hiring manager, know how interested you are in learning more, because cybersecurity is ever growing. Every day it's something new,
Right.
something different. And I think coming with that honest, you don't have to have 3 degrees. I mean, cybersecurity is fairly new, right? So I get a lot of candidates who are second guessing themselves or saying, well, I've only done IT or I've only done help desk. You can take that experience and really, I think, not only apply it to a current role, but take those same skill sets and apply them to how we're learning how
Mhm.
cybersecurity is I guess developing and growing. So just be
Yeah.
honest and put your cards on the table. And there's a lot of opportunity in this field for all of us. It's a lot of
I
room.
think that's true. Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. And remember, getting your skis, getting ahead of your skis is not necessarily always smart, but also knowing where to go for that training and on the job experience counts for so much. So
It does.
sometimes it's
It
a matter
does.
of just getting the position to get in and learn the environment and to, capitalize on those soft skills that you have, capitalize on those other talents and gifts that you have,
Mhm.
and then getting the technical experience along the way could be really valuable, I assume.
It changes, right? It changes so much. I have a great example. I don't think you've done a spotlight on this individual yet, but and hopefully you will. But he came in a little uncertain, and like I said, had a background in like help desk and IT, and he's really excelled like in maybe the past 6 or 7 months, and is in a lead role now. So
Oh,
it
that's awesome.
yeah, don't limit yourself or even second guess yourself. I don't
Right.
care if you spent 20 years in IT, come spend the next 20 in cyber. You'll get it. It'll be
Right.
fine.
That's awesome. Well, of course, our spotlights are also always about getting to know the humans because we do believe in the human connection. And we all, especially in this virtual world, something that I try to remind people, CyberClan is a 100% virtual company. And I was realizing today, even when I'm not on a Zoom call, I'm just walking around my house, not talking to anybody, not getting to know individuals. And so hopefully this is one way for even just our own employees to get to know each other, but also for others who are working with us to get to know each other. So I'd love to know just a little bit about you, Natlee Green. What do you do in your off time? What's something that's really important to you?
Sure. Well, definitely have to talk about the ancestry research that I do, genealogy research.
Mhm.
That is it's a hobby, but it's a passion. And we've talked about this before. It's something that probably for the past 30 years I have been obsessed with, knowing where I came from, where my family roots stemmed from. It's just something that when I have a minute outside of work and spending time, of course, with my family, I'm always just checking in. Like I have ancestry on my phone. I'm just like putting
Oh,
in
wow.
new stuff. And my dad and I have that in common. So he'll send me like new names and new records. He's like, "Hey, is this one of ours?" And I'm like, "Let's see." And it's so, it's that's my passion outside of my family and in my work. So yeah.
That's awesome. I can attest to that, everybody. I've actually been lucky enough to have Natlee join me for a completely separate conversation during Black History Month about genealogy and ancestry and why it's so important, especially for people of color in this country to know, some of you guys were here at the founding at the very beginning. Like it's not, this misconception that everyone just came over at some point. So did we all. And so it's really important to know, where I think your family's been here way longer than my family has been. But you're going to help me find that out because I don't know all my ancestry. So I'm excited to hear about it.
Yes, it'll be fun. I'm excited. Yeah, I feel I'll like start a whole notebook for you. It's like the Aaron file. I love it. It's my
Oh,
thing.
that's so exciting. Well, that, and then I also know that you happen to be a wonderful biking enthusiast, as in two wheels
Yes,
biking, right? That's cycling. Is that
yes.
cycling versus biking?
Exactly.
I
I
don't know. Like,
mean, if I was brave enough, I'd get a motorcycle, but I'm just not.
yeah,
I used to ride with like on the back for many years, but no, I'm just a cyclist. I got hurt last summer. I
I
was out,
remember.
which is the worst because like we're in a pandemic, and that was my escape, right? That was my sense of peace. So I had two broken limbs, no fun. Had a surgery. So it was, yeah. So but in September though, I got back out and rode until probably well into December. Actually, today's such a pretty day.
I know. I was just gonna say, I'm staring out my window, and we don't live too
Yeah,
far from each other. It's like you better get
exactly.
out there.
I
Yeah.
took my son to come with me, get on the trail for a little while. So yeah, definitely something I love to do.
That's great. Well, Natalie, I know that I certainly enjoy working with you every day, and I'm so glad we were able to finally find time to introduce you to the rest of the world. And of course, anyone out there that is interested in working with CyberClan is going to come across your path at one point or another.
Mhm.
So I hope you all out there, heard some good, helpful hints from Natalie about that. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Erin. I had a great time.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.